Oh, I'm open. I don't think you're invited, Muffy. I'm sorry. I am but one humble practitioner of the mysterious art of pattern making. Just another priestess called to the crafting table, as it were. And don't worry, complete devotion is not required. You can make one dress for Halloween and then not show up for another year. I'm kidding, get your house in order. Now, I keep several sacred texts in my own personal library, and I prefer the older testaments, books from when dressmaking had only just solidified into a new standardized practice. Began fitting clothing over the actual body as opposed to rigid foundation garments. Well, there were still bras and girdles and corsets, but they were a tiny bit more person-shaped than they had been even just 50 years beforehand. We can't pretend these systems were not designed to be worn over all of this, and the mid-century methods still represent averages of some sort of imaginary ideal. Still, fashion at large and formal apparel production programs use near-identical modes of flat pattern design today, and thus I shall continue flailing within the confines of my own sacred tradition. Today we begin by consulting 3 of my favorite pattern drafting Bibles from within my own collection. The first is my copy of Practical Dress Design from 1947, a reprint from earlier editions. Their advice for making a block pattern? Find a similar commercial pattern and start there. I already have a video covering this method, which I will link in a card here. This second time-worn tome is my beloved copy of Modern Pattern Design from 1942. The advice for foundation pattern acquisition this time is to draw a block from measurements, as I have done before using the Armstrong text, as can be seen in a video I will link below. And hilariously, if you think the Armstrong size chart is lacking, this book from 1942 has only 2 sizes on their chart instead, so wow, buddy. Big yikes. But the last volume I consult today is Dress Design, Draping and Flat Pattern Making from 1948. This is one of the most advanced pattern making resource texts I have yet uncovered from the 1940s, and it is excellent. But their advice for block pattern acquisition is even more ridiculous still. Before trying to make a block pattern, they suggest you make your own perfect body double dress form from scratch to use for draping. And while it would be nice for us all to achieve such a remarkable feat, I have a revolutionary concept instead. Use the dress form you already have. Your living, breathing, actual body. Though a very quick aside to say I really appreciate 1948 calling out through time to diss the much-loved duct tape dress form. The sacred texts agree to disagree. There is no right method for acquiring your personal block patterns. There are suggested starting points, and then there is fitting them. All we need for a first draft is already standing here. It's the one holding the ruler. I do think it's important to note before we begin that every single method of block acquisition requires additional fitting. Even Modern Pattern Design says, when using measurements to draft, the first mock-up reveals inaccuracies. It is expected you will get at least a few measurements off. And when the measurements create a truly wonkadoodle shape during the flat pattern drafting, that is the point where the experts go, wait a minute, and the beginners instead determine this is too hard and I'm giving up. Drafting from measurements is not for the faint of heart, but it's also not necessary because blocks are forged in the fitting, not in the raw materials you start with. Besides, you are not bad at fitting, you are bad at Googling, but more on that later. Building a block is a process of fitting, not matchmaking. The book, the pattern, the method we start with does not actually fecking matter. I don't want to hear it, babes. Your favorite sloper pattern doesn't hold any more magic than any other. If it fit you right out of the package, that was dumb luck, not divinity. Which of course means we don't have to start with this, or this, or this, or these, or even this. But we can start with this, a rectangle of muslin, and we need nothing else. So I don't want to hear any excuses. All right, let's prep this bit of fabric. We need a large rectangle cut or torn along the straight grain. Grab a piece that is at least 24 inches and is like wide as your front plus 5 inches, let's say, as a generalization. We will be aligning the straight grain up with the center front of the torso, and therefore we will need to mark it along the rectangle for reference. Do this in a very visible pen. You can drape on either side of your body, or onto your buddy body, or onto whoever is standing nearby for extra practice. You can also create blocks for both sides of your body individually if you happen to know you are rather asymmetrical. Though very slight asymmetry is to be expected and isn't really accounted for, usually the pattern is simply mirrored. Next, just under about halfway down your fabric, mark a perpendicular line 90 degrees to the first. In a moment, this will become your apex level. Grab your pins, scissors, a marker maybe, and then find yourself a mirror. And next we drape. Hello there, it's me, Bianca, your friendly neighborhood closet historian. I've got leggings on. I've got the long line Rago bra on underneath. And I've got this size medium, very skin tight polyester thin little tee on that I can draw on directly with this permanent marker. And something I forgot to put on the supply list last time was a piece of ribbon. A length of ribbon or string tied around the waistline can help you figure out where that waistline is supposed to be. Turn that bow to the back here so I can see where my waist level needs to be. I will just go ahead and mark on my shoulder where I think my shoulder seam should end, or the sleeve should begin, basically. Like so. The shoulder seam on this t-shirt isn't so bad, but don't rely on the seams of the shirt because stretchy stuff, it's moving around. That's not reliable. I will, however, go ahead and sketch in a center front seam for myself, again, just as a basic reference point, and same for the side seam as well, although I've just drawn these in for a basic reference point, and almost more because it makes it easier for you to understand what I'm talking about, as opposed to me needing to rely on them exclusively. All right, I have my piece of muslin here with the teed off line going on here. And I'm going to go ahead and try and pin this so that the horizontal line goes horizontally around my body across the apex, and that the first line we drew goes straight along the center front of my body. So I'll go ahead and try and pin this piece of fabric to my t-shirt using myself as the dress form. All right, here we go. Kind of got like a little blanket going on here. So I'm trying to keep this line here level with the ground, or parallel to the ground, like so, perpendicular to the center front of both my body and the first line we drew. I will try and smooth out the rest of the fabric towards my side seam of my body, again keeping that as level as I can with the floor. And I will just start to sketch in my neckline apparently, even before I pin that, because why do things in order? You know, that's just silly. Also, apex level, how do I know where that is? It's the very center of the fullest part of the bust. So the part of the bust that if you were to walk into the wall would hit the wall first. Hopefully that makes sense. And I will just cut a little bit of this extra fabric up here by my neck away so I can smooth this without it getting in trouble. Always leave yourself a little bit more room than you are inclined to, I suppose, because it's easier to cut more fabric away than it is to glue any on. Again, trying to keep this level. Let's go ahead. We're going to have to take some of this fabric up into the shoulder to keep things level. But mostly we're just trying to smooth this over to the side, pin it to my side so that that line remains parallel with the floor. And yes, later I realize I can move the camera so that you can see what I see in the mirror and see me, but I hadn't gotten that far at this point for some reason. Just trying to think about too many things at once, I suppose. You know, not swallowing pins, not losing them somewhere in my living room, that kind of a thing. So once I have the side pinned, I pin this to my neckline just a little bit here, and I start folding the excess fabric into like a pinched off area until I can get the neckline and the underarm area quite smooth. So I'm just going to try and pinch this into a little bundle that I can fold into sort of a pleat, or some would say dart, up here at the shoulder, and I will pin that excess into place so that things are looking smooth here between the arm and the neck. All right, we're doing okay. Again, does any of this have to be absolutely perfect? No, this is round one. All right, so we're going to go ahead and try and pin the rest of this fabric down along the side seam. We don't want to pull it too far back. We don't want to pull it too far forward. We're trying to keep everything, again, in line with that geometric grid that we're imagining. So I'm just trying to smooth this down straight as I can along the side seam, pin it into place, so that again I end up with a little bit of excess between the center front and the side seam. And once again, if you've watched the darts video, seen me do this on a little dinky little dress form, here I am doing it on a person. This kind of gets pinched away to fit the fabric towards the body and looks, well, a little bit like a dart once we're done with that. So again, this is how darts are formed and why they are used, because the body is curvy and the fabric started flat. All right, just keep pinning. I'm going to go ahead and grab my marker now and draw along where I think the shoulder seam should be. Trust me, this is going to move so much as we keep working through not only today's video, but also probably the next video as well. And I'm just going to roughly sketch in an arm side here. Again, this is not final by any means. We can already see that I did not take enough pinch into the shoulder dart, so I have a little bit of extra fullness here. We will deal with that later. I'm not going to worry about a tiny little inch of extra fullness right now. We're just getting the very, very basic shape in place. I will go ahead and mark the apex on here. Again, the center of the bust. Mark the waist level here, just trying to sketch that ribbon. This muslin is relatively sheer, so I can go ahead and get away with that. And I will sketch in a rough side seam as well. Again, this does not have to be perfect by any means. I'm just trying to get the bodice shape going, using my own body, using my own proportions. And I'll cut some more of the excess away here so we can see what things are looking like. Again, I'll pin this back to my side. It's looking, you know, messy, but workable. Here again, I have my dart And I still have that little bit of excess at the arm side. We'll deal with that later. But for now, I will go ahead and unpin this from my body, take this piece of muslin back over to the drafting table, and transfer all of this information onto some paper. Piece of alphanumeric in my case. Let's go ahead and again square off the same 2 lines that I started with on the piece of muslin as good reference points to use when transferring all this onto the paper. I will actually go ahead and just pin this along the center front, in fact, so things don't move around too much. Now I just want to transfer everything I sketched onto the muslin while I was wearing this onto the paper itself. Again, I'm using a marker for this, but I highly recommend you use pencil. You can also use a tracing wheel if you have such a thing at hand here in your sewing room. You can go ahead and go over the lines with a tracing wheel and it will create like perforations or little marks or texture in the paper below that you can then use as a reference for sketching everything into place. Also, I don't know if there's a motorcycle rally going on outside of my town, but it seems like everyone has just revved their engines now that I've pressed record. So typical, honestly, typical. All right, transferring everything that I had on the muslin onto the paper. So I'd marked where I had pinched that bit of fabric away at the waist. Those are now going to become my dart legs, and I will connect them to the apex itself. And then sketch in the waist a little bit here. Same for the shoulder dart here. I have marked along the makeshift shoulder seam. The shoulder seam we've got so far, marked either side of that pinched away bit of fabric, and I can go ahead and connect those dart legs down to the apex as well. I do still need to add seam allowance in some areas, so I'm going to go ahead and do that as I go. Some people like to do seam allowance last. I like to have seam allowance marked on my blocks in the end. Some people don't use seam allowance. This is a controversial topic. We can get into it some other time. I like to have seam allowance already integrated in my patterns, so I am keeping track of when and where I'm using that as I move through these different versions today. I'm going to add on like 3/8 of an inch to my neckline just because I have a feeling I will need more height there. But everywhere else I've got 1/2 inch seam allowance marked, which is the standard that I use, except for here along the arm side. Don't know why I forgot to put that on there. Because again, usually when doing processes like this, you're thinking about too many things at once. For example, I know for a fact that by the time I'm done with work on this day, it'll be too late to go to the pet store and get my cat's freeze-dried treats, which is not what you should be thinking about while you're trying to draft a bodice block, but it has been on my mind this week, and I still haven't made it to the darn store, so the cats might end up eating me by the end of the week. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to go ahead and reference Pattern Making for Fashion Design to see where the dart placement measurement is, so I can put these where they're quote-unquote supposed to be on the basic set. And I will just pause before I start actually moving these darts around to say that your darts can be anywhere, including on the basic set if you want. I just like to reference industry standards for where these darts should be to start with, and if I have to move them around afterwards, I'll move them around afterwards. Again, wherever they are, even on my blocks, I'm probably going to move and use them in different ways from the block, so I just like to have them in the quote-unquote standard spot for the block pattern, and then I'll move them around as I see fit when it comes to designing clothing later. So I'm just moving this towards the front a little bit, like so. I think the measurement that they recommend for the larger sizes like me is 3 13/16 away from the center front. But let's just like round that to like 3 3/4 or something, because we don't need that. We don't need 13/16 in our life. Nobody needs that. Next up, just because I'm used to working with a pattern that has a side dart instead of a shoulder dart when it comes to fitting things on my own personal body, I'm going to go ahead and move my shoulder dart into the side. So I'm just going to do that here. You can see my shoulder seam looks so little now that I've done this. But I'm going to go ahead and fold my new side dart closed, snip that. I folded the fullness in the wrong direction, quote-unquote wrong direction, whatever. For now, it does not matter. This is version 1, and I've just labeled it as such, version 1. And now I will go ahead and use this to cut out version 1, and I'm going to mark everything that's on this pattern back onto this new piece of muslin as well. Again, best practice is to keep each version of both the muslin and the paper separate, and before you make any adjustments, to trace a new copy to work on. That is just best practice. You will see I get messy with this today because I'm not used to working in this way anymore. And in general, we should probably practice what I say, not what I do, in these instances, because I don't always have my teacher hat on when I'm doing something, and I should. I'm going to add on a boatload of seam allowance on this. I want to keep the seam allowance at about 1 inch, 1.5 inches even at the side seam, arm side, and shoulder, because I know I'm going to be moving these around and futzing with it. I am also going to leave a good 1.5 to 2 inches at the center front because I will pin this on my body and I want room to work with in order to do so. But yes, we have one front here, like so, and I can go ahead and pin my fresh new dart closed, like so. Just going to fold that into place and pin it. I'm going all the way to the apex for this. Eventually I will back off away from the apex, but for now it's just early days. I'll just pin all the way to the apex to see if we're even in the right ballpark, you know? And luckily we have a cute scarf to look at instead of my horrendous haircut, which by the end of this video will be on full display, sadly enough. All right, back over here in front of the mirror, I have this version 1. I guess before it was version 0. This is version 1 from the paper pattern. I'm going to go ahead and pin that along the center front again. Again, trying to make sure that I have the horizontal line lined up along the apex point here. It looks a little high to me here, but you know, hindsight, isn't it beautiful? I mean, I recommend, honestly, filming yourself doing this so you can reference back and see where you potentially made a mistake or made a breakthrough, because it is useful to have the video to look back on. All right, I'm just going to snip my seam allowance along the waist here so that this curve of my hips already starting to flare out again from below the waist doesn't interact with anything. Then I can go ahead and try and pin things along the side. You can see when I put my arm down, things start to get a little saggy and fit less well. Part of that is because it's pinned to the t-shirt and the t-shirt moves when I move. This is why it's better to do this with a buddy system and have your friend help you and you help your friend. I figure you are as introverted as I am and you're doing this on your own. So here I'm going to go ahead and finally pinch out that extra bit of dart fullness that needs to be taken away along the arm side. I will go ahead and mark my new preferred shoulder seam. That's why I left myself so much seam allowance. I'm going to mark where I want my shoulder seam to be and where I want my neckline to be. Obviously I need to add more fabric on here, so I'm going to go ahead and make an indication. Tell myself to do that. This front doesn't look too bad, but the side could probably come up towards my neck a little bit more, if we're thinking this is including seam allowance. Certainly isn't enough here right now for that. But just marking anything you see, pinching away any excess, and then I will go ahead and try and start draping the back. Now on yourself, this is a nightmare. I highly recommend going ahead and using the measurements method to get a back, because this, trying to drape it yourself on your own back, the fact that I got even close is highly surprising, especially watching this back. It's just a, oh goodness, good luck doll kind of a thing. I'm laying the fabric on my back. Again, I'm trying to position the straight line along my center back from what I can see, and the line at the horizontal level matching up with the line on the front piece. That's like a apex level in the front, I guess. And I'm thinking, you know, that doesn't not look like a back pattern, so I'm actually surprised that worked as well as it did. You have to be able to contort a little bit, and you have to have a lot of courage to even attempt giving that a go. Again, the buddy system. Can't recommend it enough. But this isn't about doing something the easy way. This is about proving that it is possible even when it's difficult, I suppose. I'm going to go ahead and transfer, again, the little pinch out markings from my muslin onto my paper pattern. Again, should I have traced a new copy of this paper pattern? Say it with me, everyone. Yes, but here I am turning version 1 into version 2. Don't do this. It's not allowed. But I've transferred those dart markings onto the piece of paper into the arm side here. Before I forget, I want to go ahead and bring up and out my shoulder a little bit, or my neckline, I guess, or my shoulder / neckline. Let's go ahead and do that. We'll see. Is that what I needed? We'll find out. And I did say earlier that you're not bad at fitting, you're bad at Googling. You might be bad at fitting, or you might just be a beginner, honestly. Even I consider myself a beginner when it comes to fitting. I, again, have only ever had practice with fitting my own body, which is why I kind of know its own quirks at this point, which if you've been fitting commercial patterns to you, you may as well. So you might already know a couple of things from fitting commercial patterns to yourself. You might know that, oh, my apex is usually lower than the pattern says, or higher, or my shoulder is usually more or less sloped. You're kind of used to looking at what you've had to do to patterns in the past to be able to fix them. Unless making a bodice block is the first pattern you've ever tried to fit, in which case I applaud your courage and think you deserve a special sticker or something, you know? I'm just going to continue adding on seam allowance where it needs to be, including along the arm side here. Before I forget, and I'll go ahead and trim the excess away. And I will go ahead and slash the excess that was created along the arm side here down to the apex and swing that additional dart fullness into the side dart where it belongs. If you've pinched out something that's like over 1.5 inches, I would go ahead and split this between the two darts, but because it's just another, I don't know, 3/4 of an inch, I'm just going to throw that into the side dart for now. We can redistribute dart fullness later if we want to. The point here is to find the correct amount, percentage, I suppose, of dart fullness, not necessarily to have it in the right place. Again, I moved things around a little bit, moved this into the side from the shoulder, moved the front dart towards the center front a little bit, but where the dart is hardly matters. It's about the amount of dart, not where it's at this point. In general in the blocks, really. Large truck driving by, large truck driving by. Where are you going? I will, of course, keep each muslin and set those aside as I go. even if I'm being naughty with the paper pattern. Now I'm going to go ahead and just square off all the markings that the little indications and sketch marks I left myself on this back pattern. Of course, there are no darts or pinch-aways on this piece right now. I'm not worrying about that yet. I was more worried about keeping the horizontal line that I had drawn on the piece of muslin lined up with the bust level line on the front, because that is simply what is important in draping. So for this very rough draft, I was only really keeping those two lines in mind, and the rest will come later. But I'll cut all the major excess away, and I will trace a new copy of my front, trace version 3 onto another piece of muslin here, so that I can pin it to that new back piece, and we can continue fitting that over on my body again. Again, leaving myself only the traditional 1/2 inch of seam allowance at this point, except for along the front where I will need to pin it closed or pin it to my body. Later on, we'll be pinning it closed. For now, I am just working on 1/2 of the body. Eventually, we will switch to having both sides of the body because it just makes it easier to fit the back. But here in version 3, I have not yet bothered. I again will pin my darts closed. You could sew them as well if you want to, but just means it's more annoying to adjust if you have to. I could always just unpin this and pinch out less or pinch out more. And I'm going to go ahead and match up again that horizontal line, like so. I need to match up the horizontal line from the front with the horizontal line along the back, and then I will adjust the side seam and arm side and waist depth along this line based off of that horizontal line and where I need it to be, as opposed to where I accidentally held it, while it was over on my back. If this is very off, I would just try again to drape the back, but mine wasn't too distant. It was only like 1 inch away. Once again, I have pinned my new muslin along the center front, pinning things into place, pinned it along the side seam as well. Side seam of my body, that is. Like so. I'm just messing around taking notes. Then I can go ahead and do the same with the back. I don't know why I didn't pin these together along the side seam at this point. Probably should have. I think I was just getting a general idea of if that was working at all, because of course I've never draped anything on my body like this before. So you're getting my first try at this, by the way. I've never done this before. So we'll see how I do. Again, I do have my regular blocks that I use all the time that we could technically compare this to. I have not done that yet over here on the table, but I may just be naughty and show you how far or how close we're getting later in the video. We'll see. People usually get mad at me for doing that kind of thing, but I think it's interesting to note how close I get to my perfected block. I think it's interesting to see how close I'm getting with the modifications I'm making without referencing it. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully that makes any sense. Again, transfer all the markings that you made onto your muslin, onto a new piece of paper. Look at me, I'm even tracing a new copy. Good job. Don't need to be messing with the last paper pattern. We can let that be version 1 through 3, and then maybe this could be, 4 through whatever. Again, drawing in new versions of the neckline, shoulder, etc. I think part of what keeps this more fun instead of frustrating is letting it be a process, not expecting the shoulder seam to be perfect on try 3, not expecting to have a perfect arm side. I guess it's less pressure for me because I don't need this new block. I already have one. So for me, it's hard to say I wasn't, I wasn't getting frustrated. Yeah, of course I wasn't. I already have a pattern. So it's less of a dire situation for me. That's fair. But I do think that's one way to console yourself and keep yourself chill and make this a learning process as opposed to a frustrating process, is just knowing, it's going to take several tries to get the shoulder exactly right. It's going to take several tries to get the arm side right. Those are the hardest things to fit, I think, is the top. And a lot is resting on that shoulder, literally and figuratively. So that's where a lot of the fit problems stem from. But it's also that, and that's the hard part, So allow yourself a little bit of grace with that, I think. Anyhow, we have version 4 here. It's very similar to version 3, honestly. The differences were super subtle. I'm already making very subtle changes, at least when it comes to the front. For the back here, I will go ahead and create a paper pattern here. Of course, I have just been drawing on the muslin, and I will transfer all relevant information down here onto the paper. Most importantly, again, that horizontal line. The rest of your body is going to be curves and topsy-turvy, but that line is the kind of artificial geometry we're adding to the situation in some ways. You could even, if you were the kind of person who is very DIY friendly or know someone, you could even use a laser level to project the line on you or your friend's body to see exactly where that line needs to be, by the way. That would be very advanced. How fun would that be? I wish I had a laser level. I should get one. I could use it. Although the reason I don't have one is because nothing in my house is level anyway. So I have to make a kind of compromise between things that are perfectly level and perfectly wonkadoodle, because my house is 130 years old. So it has settled in various ways. And if I make everything perfectly level, it would end up looking very much like a fun house in here. And you know, some of those principles translate to pattern drafting as well. When your body is very wonkadoodle, sometimes it's better to have things be a little bit curved or a little bit quote unquote off in order for them to look right. Sometimes things have to be a little wonky for them to look wonderful. But once I have all the information transferred over from the muslin on the back here, I do want to go ahead and make sure the side seam is lining up with the front. So let me grab my front pattern here, fold my dart closed so I can make sure that the side seam is nearing the same length. If I, again, match up that horizontal line, I want to make sure the arm side and the waist are at the same level. Up here on the shoulder, my shoulder seam for the back is about half an inch to an inch longer right now than the front, and I was just making sure, did I have the right idea here? What am I doing? Where should the seam allowance be? Again, there's a lot of correction to do back here still, so I'm not worried about it being perfect. This is an in-between stage. I like to recognize that it's an in-between moment. What I'll do when I pin this together is I'm going to kind of pin the front to the back from the shoulder point, like the tip of my shoulder, inwards towards the neck, and then leave the last bit towards the neck free, and I'll just pinch and pin it once I have this muslin on my body later, because I still need to put darts in this back pattern. So, you know, we're not there yet, and I'll show you how I plan to do so. I'm going to cut this out with an inch of seam allowance along the center back, but have that inch be along a fold so I can pinch it out of the way, and if I needed to take it out along the center back, this means I could. In the end, I didn't need to, but I just like to leave myself that option. And as I'm about to cut out, I don't know, it's paper version 4, but I guess this would be muslin version 5. I'm not really keeping track. Again, let it be a free-form process. You know, this took me 2 days. This is actually on a new day with fresh eyes and a fresh muslin where I will go ahead and cut the back out, again, along the fold with that extra, cut out plenty of extra along much of the other seam allowance, a full inch at the shoulder seams right now, and then extra at the front and back. So I can let this out if I need to, pinch things away, add more in. We're trying to keep it loosey-goosey. Again, this is more like sculpture than it is like math. You'll notice I've barely measured anything. Mostly I'm using my ruler as a straight edge more than actually using it as a ruler. And even though I'm being a little bit cleaner with this next version here, I'm still not going to be sewing my darts on the front. I will still pin those. I want to mark the darts in the back as well before I move on to the stage where I'm actually sewing things. Again, just marking those indications from the paper pattern onto the muslin, going back and forth between muslin and paper, really. You could do all of this work in muslin, by the way, but you can't like add more fabric on, whereas you could take more paper on, so there's pros and cons, pros and cons. And again, my 2 initial lines on both the front and the back are still my main reference points so I don't get lost, so I know where I am on the pattern and on my body. So it's important to transfer those every time onto both the paper and onto the muslin. Again, mark in my center front here. Again, I have plenty of seam allowance there so I can pin it closed along my front, especially this time I'm doing a left and a right. So I definitely will be closing this up along the front instead of just pinning it to my shirt. As you can see, I'm not even yet wearing my little shirt because I was doing this work while still wearing my Star Wars t-shirt. And then I will switch over into my funny little outfit back over in the fitting room instead. And this time we will get a much better look at just how ridiculous my hair is right now. I had an asymmetric haircut that I got before I moved to New York. So, you know, in October or November of last year. And then I trimmed it a little bit myself a couple months ago just because one side was so much longer than the other at that point. But now it's asymmetric in like the worst of ways, as opposed, at least it was like nicely done before. Now, like I hacked it a bit, so oof. I trimmed my undercut myself, which is fine. It's just the hair on top of that it's a lot of different lengths right now. And honestly, I just need to go get it trimmed so that everything is the same as the shortest length, but I haven't done it yet. If anyone knows, anyone in the capital region, anyone has salon recommendations, let me know. One of my good friends in Colorado was my hairdresser, and honestly, I miss her, so there is a little bit of trauma attached to that because I don't want to have to go to a new hair person. I've been going to my friend for the longest time, and it was more fun getting to hang out with her, you know? Anyhow, I've marked my darts, and again, all relevant information onto the muslin, so I'll go ahead and pin those darts into place. Again, I'm still pinning all the way to the apex on this version. The next version, I'll be good, back my dart legs off and actually sew them in place, but for now I'm still pinning. And yes, all this takes enough time that I can ramble on about my hair for a minute. You know, I'm as free as my hair, as Lady Gaga would say. I'm not really exactly sure what that song means, but it seems important. Let me go ahead and just actually iron this center back overlap in place. It's only there just in case I need it, and in the end I don't, but again, Just best practice. Do as I say, and in this case, as I do. I mean, I've drafted the back of this in the most, slapdash way possible. I can't believe it worked at all, honestly. So I'm really trying to keep in mind, odds are it's going to need some fixing. But at this point, I will go ahead and pin my fronts to the back along the side seam, making sure I'm lining up where that is. It's drawn on with marker, like so. And again, I will line up my shoulder seams. The front is still shorter than the back, so I will go ahead and just center the front along the back for this side. And then on the other side, I will, instead of overlapping and pinning the side seam closed, I will pinch it and pin it and leave it flappy with the seam allowance on the outside. Hopefully you'll be able to see what I mean. I don't know what the technical terms for pinning things in different ways are, if there are such a thing, sadly enough. You can see here how much of my hair is shaved away, by the way. I have my little top knot going on here. I don't know, who has a top knot still? Other than, me and Jackie Wells. That's one for the cyberpunk fans in the audience. You're welcome. All right, so I've pinned this seam allowance inside on one side and outside on the other, so I can mess with the outside side and see what it looks like on the inside side. Gives me a little bit to look at. And again, I forgot to mark my horizontal line on this side. Oops, let me go ahead and mark that. I need that line so that I can line up either side and pin them together when I'm wearing this. So again, very important reference point. Make sure to always transfer it over. This is version 4. I mean, really, is it version 4 or is it version 5? Something in between. 4.5. Let me go ahead and put this buddy on. Oh, my hair. Oh, it's just so painful. I was like, I can leave it down, right? No, you can't. You really... Let's just say I was moving across the country. I saw season 2 of Arcane and I said, my hair needs to be more asymmetric. And that was a mistake, but we all make mistakes when we are frazzled, okay? And none of us really knows if we want to be Vi or date Vi, and sometimes it's both, okay? All right, here we are, pinned into the buddy. I've pinned it closed along the center front. As we can see, there's plenty of extra room in here, and that's because this back doesn't have darts in it. So let me go ahead and just pinch that and pin this into place. And how do I know that I'm pinching the same amount on either side? I don't, and I'm not. But we're still going to pin both, quote-unquote, left and right back darts into place, and I'll show you why and how in the next step. So let me go ahead and pin the excess out of this side as well. What you're looking for here is to make sure that the side seam is not becoming too skewed, angled towards the front or back along the waist. So really I need to be referencing what's happening under my arm along the side seam here. It's not too far, it's a little bit forward, but it's still quite straight up and down, so that's not so bad. And in the front, I do still have a little bit of extra room as well, so I'm going to go ahead and pinch that out of my front darts later. But for now, I'm just checking the rest of what's happening here. I do think I need some back shoulder darts here, so I'm trying to figure out how I can pinch out a little bit of excess along my shoulder seam, at least on the back. I will unpin this. While I'm here, I need to redraw in the neckline and the shoulder seam anyhow. Again, the shoulder seam. What I will determine last in this, unfortunately. Ooh, an orange cat has come to see me. Hello, Orange. Do you have anything to add, Orange buddy? Jammies? Ooh, I see. Xander? He's yawned. Same, buddy. Same. Let me go ahead and just pinch a little bit out of the back here while this is unpinned. The t-shirt is kind of nice because while things kind of stick to it, things also kind of stick to it. So the muslin stays even when I haven't pinned it because there's a little bit of friction on this silly t-shirt. All right, I've got a little pinch out here, pinned into place. I've been a little bit conservative with that. You don't want to pull too much of the back over there, especially because you're going to have a dart on the other side. So I always err on the side of not taking out enough, and then in the next version I can take out the rest, Like even with these front darts, I need a little bit more in these darts. So I'm going to go ahead and pinch it now. Instead of taking the full amount on the first try, I'm going to go ahead and add another, oh, thank you, a 1/4 inch here along each of my front darts. Also, I think you can see here that the back needs a horizontal length adjustment and possibly a sway back adjustment, which I did not see in the moment, but I can see here in the video. So another point on the pros and cons list here of actually filming yourself doing this. But once again, pin and draw everything you need right onto the muslin. Here I'm going to go ahead and mark where I had put the pins in for my back darts, both the shoulder and the waist darts. That way I can transformation down onto the paper pattern. And again, trace a new copy of your paper pattern, but I'm not going to. That's best practice. If you're like me and you've done this several times before, I understand the flippancy. But if you haven't done this before, I do recommend tracing a new copy of the paper pattern each time, making a new muslin each time. You can see here I have basically pinched out a 1/4 inch on either side. So that's another 1/2 inch being added into this front dart. along the waist. I'll have to do that on this other side as well. I didn't pinch it out while I was wearing it, but same idea. And I'm thinking, what other modifications did I want to make to this round? Who can remember? Let me go ahead and take out all my pins and I'll come back to you. Come down here to the dart. Again, I added in 1/4 inch. So I'll just redraw in new dart legs here. 1/4 inch out. Make this dart a little bit bigger. Over here on the neckline, I want to go ahead and add in a 1/2 inch to the neckline here. So I'll just tape on some paper. And this is why we have paper patterns instead of just working on muslin, because you can't really tape on more muslin. It's just not as easy. Though in a moment I will take off this extra bit I'm adding to the neck. You can never know that in the moment. So it's a modification I will have to remove, sadly enough. Oh, now the orange cat has settled on my bed behind me and he is very cute and sleepy. It is almost 9 p.m. here as I'm talking to you now, so fair enough, although he didn't do anything today, and I have. They never help with chores or anything. I don't know what that's about. All right, now because I want to start sewing for my next mock-up, I'm going to go ahead and back my darts off away from the apex. Now, the larger your cup size, the larger like the sort of apex zone of your body is, the more you want to back away from the apex. So I'm going to come out 1 1/4 inch away from the apex. I think pattern making for fashion design says 5/8, which is ridiculously small. Anywhere between 3/4 of an inch to even like 2 or 3 inches away from the apex is honestly pretty standard, and that's because there is no real standard here. If your darts are looking too pointy still, back it off a little bit further from the apex. That's the only recommendation I can give you. Again, I've only ever fit myself, but I know for my personal shape, I usually like to back off at least 1 inch, if not a full 1.5 inches away from the apex. Maybe like start with 1 inch and then see how it goes. And then reconnect new dart legs here. This is where you're actually going to sew those darts. Every time you want to move these darts or use, dart manipulation in your pattern drafting, you will go ahead and continue them all the way to the apex. But for when you're sewing, you always back them off away from the apex. And because I do a lot of dart manipulation, I don't use curved darts. Some people like curved darts because you can get a close fit below the bust. But I will talk more in a future video about why I do not do that and don't think it's necessary or technically the right approach. Unless you like really, really love a skin-tight look, which at that point, why are you making woven garments and not just using knits? I don't know. If you like things to be that form-fitting. But we can talk about that more later. My personal biases are already showing. I needed to put a little bit more excess down here below my dart so that I could fold it into the correct shape. I always fold my dart excess towards the waist or towards the center front, just what I was taught. You can fold them up and out if you want to. I go down and towards the center. You may also notice I added a tiny bit of width at the underarm along the side seam as well, and again just tapered that into nothing down at the waist. I just noticed I needed a tiny bit more width across the bust line directly. All right, now we are here on the back. I'm going to go ahead and measure the total amount of the 2 pinch outs that I did along the waist. Then I will add this total together and split it by 2 so that I'll have 2 even darts along the back and can, work on one side of the pattern. So I'll just add these up to get the full dart fullness pinch out that I need along the back waistline, then just separate that by 2 evenly. Once again, I'm going to quickly reference where the back dart placement needs to be, about 3 1/4, I think, away from the center back. 3 5/8, honestly. American imperial nonsense, that's what that is. Like so much wrong with the world. No surprise there. So I'm going to make this dart as tall as my underarm. So I'm just squaring a line off from the underarm here, and then I will draw a line straight up from the dart placement indication, and go ahead and center my new dart on that dart placement zone. Again, I need to measure my shoulder dart as well. So I'll go ahead and find the center of my shoulder seam, and that's where I will go ahead and anchor my shoulder dart. I will draw a line perpendicular to the shoulder seam, come down 3 inches along that line. Again, this is sort of an arbitrary number. I may need more, I may need less. We're going to start with 3 inches, which is again what Pattern Drafting for Fashion Design recommends. And that's the book I've been trained with, and therefore that's what I recommend. Whether for better or for worse, Make a few more little modifications that I had indicated for myself on the muslin, on the paper patterns as I go here. And then I will go ahead and actually mark my new darts in black marker on the same muslin that I used last time. I will cut new front muslins because I adjusted a few more things that can't be taped back on. But because I have left myself plenty of extra seam allowance in this piece the last time, I have plenty of nonsense to work with back here. So I'll just go ahead and sew my darts in this time. Mark those in and sew those for the back. My microphone could run out of battery at any moment, and unless I'm paying very close attention, I will not notice. But I saw today that I had left the microphone on, since I needed to record things for the last video, which is just not a good sign because that was days ago. And so I'm sure this 9-volt is holding on by a thread. Now again, because I did make some adjustments to the neckline and shoulder, arm side, etc. to this front piece that I cannot tape back on in muslin, I will cut out new fronts, and I will transfer my finished darts from this front. I say finished, they've been backed away from the apex, and I'm going to sew them this time. So my refined darts, I will transfer those onto this new muslin as well. Again, I do want to mark my center front, leave myself extra seam allowance at the front as well, and then mark all relevant information onto the muslins, including marking my darts, so that I can pinch and pin and sew those. We finally got to the point where I'll be using a sewing machine, which is not on the supply list, but you could hand sew this, or baste it, or just pin it. So you don't technically need a sewing machine. I'll just be using mine. And again, I highly recommend you do all this kind of stuff in pencil, instead of Crayola washable marker like I do. I do end up with washable marker all over my hands as well. I kind of look like I have bruised hands by the end of a full pattern drafting day because I usually have a bunch of this washable ink all over me. I don't know how it gets everywhere, but somehow it migrates from the pens. Go ahead and pinch and pin my darts here. If you'd like to know more about darts and for some reason you've gotten to this video without seeing my darts video, I will go ahead and link that in a card here so you can see my video all about darts as well, where I include a small description of how to sew them, but more so just what they are. Although in this video we've seen how we got them. I used to get a lot of questions about why we use darts at all, but I think once you start draping, it's really self-explanatory. You just need these little triangles to make something curvy enough to fit onto a person, because people are not two-dimensional, weirdly enough. Just pinning and pinching additional darts over here at the machine, sewing my little shoulder darts quickly here. And again, I'm just referencing fashion textbooks on where to put my darts on my blocks, but it does not matter where they are. You can keep them in the shoulder, you can put it all on the side, you can put it all at the waist. You don't have to have 2 darts. I usually like to keep 2 darts because I have a significant amount of dart fullness. If you only have a little bit of dart fullness just because you have a smaller bust or your bust to waist ratio is less intense than mine, for example, I have a 10-inch difference. At any time, I usually have at least a 10-inch difference between my bust and my waist. So that's why I need so much pinch to create the correct cone for the front of my body. If you require less dart fullness, it's no problem just to have only the 1 dart, and you can put that wherever you want it. Again, on your block, leave it in like a neutral position, and then when you're designing actual patterns later on, you can move it or use it however you'd like. See any of my other dressmaking videos where I move the darts around nearly every single time. Very rarely do I leave them where they are on the block. Again, I think that's not a bad way to describe it. They're in a neutral position, which is what the blocks are in general. They are a neutral starting pattern that fits me, that I can then modify. And a lot of people want to make things with a lot more ease than I tend to. I tend to make quite close-fitting woven garments. But if you want to see me make something with this pattern that is a lot looser fit, I will go ahead and link below to my button-down shirt video, where I leave the waist dart open and add in a little bit more ease. So while a close-fitting block pattern is the standard starting point, you can make clothes with a lot of ease, much more modern, easy, relaxed styles. You can still make all of those using a basic block to start, and it helps to have like a fitted yoke at the top of a gathered shirt. If you want any part of the garment to be fitted, you can use the block as a starting point for that, and then gather and add ease for the rest of it. I am just using 10 stitches per inch, something a little bit looser than normal over here on the machine, just in case I do need to rip any of these stitches out. And I did go ahead and sew the excess out of the center back of this. I had just pinned it the last time, but I sewed it out of the way this time, just to keep things nice and smooth back there. And I will trim down the extra seam allowance that is still hanging out in the back of this muslin, so I can pin my side seams, the fronts and the backs together, and actually stitch the side seams this time. These may still need a tiny bit of adjustment, but we'll see. And I'll go ahead and try this on, and the light is too intense for you to actually see. Sometimes I have to turn the lighting down in order for you to see where the wrinkles and nonsense is happening. If I have the lights too high, it just becomes overexposed. I get a lot of complaints about my lighting, but I think too much light is worse than not enough, personally. So we'll just have to agree to disagree on that one, or you'll just have to... You probably have already left, honestly. All right, I'm back to seeing how this fits on my body. Once again, I've actually just pinned the shoulder seams instead of sewn them because I'm still not certain where I want the shoulder seam to land and hit. But the darts do seem to be working in the back. Again, it still looks like I have a little bit of too much vertical length in this back piece and possibly need a bit of a sway back adjustment on this. I think after watching this, the next time I get this muslin out, I will be adding a sway back adjustment, so we can do that. But in general, things are not too terrible. I'll show you my one quick fix hack that I tend to do on myself to fix my patterns when they just look a little bit off. I don't know why I tend to fit with this problem inherent in the system, but you'll see how I fix it. Watch what happens to the wrinkles and the nonsense of this once I pull the entire muslin up a little bit at the shoulders. So let me just imagine if this shoulder seam was half an inch lower, would everything start to sit nicer? Let's pull this up and everything below the bust starts to fit better. I mean, technically this is raising that horizontal line above the apex, but if that's what I need for it to fit perfectly, I'll do it. The horizontal line has served its purpose. If I need to move the apex up a little bit by pulling the entire muslin up at the shoulder, I will. I actually recently took the block you see me use all the time, the card version that you see me trace. I actually recently made a modification to that and took a 1/4 inch off the shoulder, bringing the whole thing up like this, and everything has fit a little bit better since. So this is just a modification. I've learned that I tend to, when fitting myself, leave too much length in the bodice. So I like to take it out, conversely, weirdly, not from the waistline, but from the shoulder. And this arm size fitting quite close, but we're going to mess with that later when we start fitting a sleeve into here, because everything you think you see that might be working or not working on a bodice muslin without a sleeve, everything gets tossed about again once you try putting a sleeve in here. So that's what we're going to be doing next time. Yes, that's right. Spoiler alert. This is not the end of my bodice fitting. This is how far I've gotten off of a basic drape. Oh, also the dart along the back shoulder here. It's still bubbling underneath the dart, so I think I need to take out a little bit more. I'll bring that down an inch. Also, I need a little bit more out of the back, and I might take that directly out of the center back here just because I don't want to skew my side seams too far, which can happen when you're modifying the darts. Just keep everything in mind, you know. Once you move one thing, everything else shifts. So look in the mirror and say, oh no, did everything shift improperly? Oh, and here I'm thinking, hey, when I raised the whole pattern up, I didn't need this extra wedge at the neckline anymore. Funny how that is. Because I brought this whole thing up, this little bit that I taped on, I no longer need, but I do need a little bit more length at the bottom. So everything just needs to shift around a tiny bit. But now that I have repinned this shoulder seam and drawn that in, this is looking really close fitting up here along the arm, which is a good starting place for all the work I need to do next time. All right, muslin is off again. I will transfer everything to my paper before I forget. Transfer everything I noticed in the mirror to paper. You don't want to go to bed and think you'll remember for the next time. You won't. I'm going to take a good 3/8 of an inch along the waist and taper that up into the neckline, out along the back here. Again, should have traced a new copy, but here I am modifying the last paper pattern again, like the fool I am. Because I'm going to take that little tiny wedge out from the back, I'm going to actually move the dart over that same amount, just so that it's still at the same angle, I suppose. And again, I will extend the dart legs on the shoulder dart another inch to see if that helps with the bubbling up there. My darn shoulder blades are more curved than I used to know. Again, another thing that has really helped my fit recently over the last year, adding a shoulder dart back in. I had ignored it to my own peril. A lot of my older videos, you can see how there is wrinkling in the back of the bodice, and that is down to the side of the back not being held up where it needs to be because of the shoulder dart. The shoulder dart actually really helps in that regard. Fitting the back is different than fitting the front. It's just a fact. Different bones, different bits. It's true. But just transferring over my new shoulder seam and all relevant information back down onto the paper pattern. Like so. I think I still need to take a little bit more height out of the back here. Once again, I was being conservative. I'd rather not take enough away and then the next round take the rest away. I don't know. Just how my little weird version of my fit brain works. I tend to be cautious. What can I say? And again for the front, transferring over all information needed, including this new shoulder seam. Of course, on the muslin, it's rather curvy here, but I'm going to make it straight. You can have a curvy shoulder seam if you want one. Again, if you want it to fit exacting, that's more like a sloper fit, you know? But I want this to fit like a block, so I'm going to make my shoulder seem more straight across than it is. In reality, my shoulder is not straight across, weirdly enough, because I am a person and I'm made of, you know, human as opposed to made of pixels. But in the false reality of fashion, we can pretend it is, all right? If I wanted something to follow my shoulder exactly, then I could wear a knit. Let me take the little wedge off the neckline that I had added the last time because it turned out I didn't need it. And I will add a little bit of length to the bottom of this instead because I've pulled everything up. And I need a tiny bit of length here at the center front. Not at the side though, because then it wouldn't match up with the back anymore. So I'm going to again taper that into nothing past the dart here. And was there anything else I need to transfer over? I don't think this round I had anything else. So here are some basic bodice blocks that I created out of nothing by draping directly onto my body. This is just one more way to make a block pattern. This is another way to create blocks from scratch that involves a lot less drawing and like sort of geometry and following instructions and more sculpting and intuitive feeling it out. Feels a little bit more artistic perhaps for some to actually just use your hands on the body itself. But of course, at this point, I'm only human and I want to know how close I've gotten to my actual blocks that I use all the time. So let's go ahead and put these on here and see. So the back, the shape is really similar, but again, I still have too much length in this, you can see. And actually, it's not as wide as my actual block I tend to use is. It's about, half an inch, not as wide, but about a half an inch too long. And for the front, look how darn close this is. I'm honestly shocked I got this close just futzing around with draping, but we'll see next time if I get any closer to the blocks I use on the regular once we go ahead and draft and start fitting in a sleeve. I hope this was in any way helpful, and thank you as always for watching. With special thanks to Alicia, Alkanet, Allison, AM Person, Amy, Ashanti, Audra, Bethany, Cheryl, Concetta, Karina, Lala, Denise, Diana, Elizabeth, Ellen, Elona, Eloquent Silence, Eric, Fatal But Not Serious, Franzi, Haley, Hesufina, Jambonium, Janet, Jenny, Lainey, Laura, Lilith, Lynn H, Lynn O, Mac, Margaret, Marie, Megan, Melody, Myrna, Michelle, Mo, Natalie, Nina, Paula, Rachamus, Sarah, Sarah F, Sean, Stephanie, Isabel, Thea, Theo, Tiffany, and Ula. And thank you to all of my patrons who make my work and these videos possible.